August 9th, 2019, Pomona, California. Nonprofit leader Amos Young is on his way to work and is driving past Freeway 60 on Town Avenue when he sees something suspicious. He decides to make a U-turn to take a closer look.
He observed what appeared to be a group of people unloading something in an area that's known to have problems in the city of Pomona.
It's concerning. I feel like something isn't right.
This area, which is about maybe a quarter-mile long, we're always dealing with the calls for illegal dumping, and it's a never-ending process of maintaining control.
In California, illegal dumping, disposing of garbage, waste, or other matter on public or private property is a crime. So Amos decides to record on his cell phone as 3 men haul items off a truck and through a hole in a chain-link fence.
I didn't know what was inside the containers, but I could smell it wasn't anything good. And that alone brought me to pause for a moment. They seemed like they were hiding something and afraid to be seen.
The men are not happy that Amos stopped to record them, so one of them starts recording him.
He whips out his phone in the same moment, like, I see you and you see me, and I really don't want you here because now I have you on video filming me. And this starts to escalate really quickly.
He pulled out his phone. My concern was that he was calling in some of his buddies from the neighborhood to come to the spot because of whatever he was hiding.
With his eyes locked on Amos, the man marches right up to his car.
At first, I really thought he was just walking over to have a conversation. But then you realize he wanted to fight.
This is scary. The man is clearly furious that Amos has interrupted his plans.
You can see it in his face. He wants his crime to go as seamlessly as possible. And now Amos is throwing a wrench in that plan.
He gets very, very upset. He comes up, comes after my driver's door, starts punching, kicking, erratically trying to get inside of the car, pulled on my door handle to try to get to me. There was very little that I could do other than be concerned about making sure that I made it home alive.
Shaken, Amos dials 911.
You're in Pomona, right?
Yep. I'm at town just before the 60 freeway. A guy walked up to my car and started banging, kicking my car. Looks like they're doing some illegal dumping as well.
Amos doesn't know who these men are or why one of them is attacking him, but he knows he's in danger.
It's unknown what's inside the vehicle. It's unknown if these suspects are on parole, probation, armed with guns or knives.
If I didn't keep my cool, it could turn violent. It already was a level of violence. So I had to keep my cool.
But his attacker is just getting started.
This guy's coming at me with a cement block. I'm terrified.
Stunned, Amos carefully backs his car away from the scene, all the while continuing to relay every detail to 911.
It's a red SUV Durango.
At that point, I pulled forward to get a better look at the license plate.
It hasn't left yet. Plate is 108R 108R.
For a split second, Amos thinks this is it. He'll never see his family again.
That rock striking any person could kill them instantly.
I was scared that that cement block was gonna come through the glass and I was gonna die. I was scared for my life. I realized at that point, this guy really is not playing.
They just took a brick to my car.
I can't hold back. I owe too much to those that have come before us to clean up our streets. He tries to get away. So I began following this guy, following the truck, and making sure that police knew every second of where they were headed.
What's your name, sir?
Amos Young. The vehicle is making a right on Marketplace.
He just had someone that threw a brick at his car. Description of the vehicle, it's a red Dodge Durango.
I thought to myself, what if police do not arrive on time? And what am I gonna do?
And Amos still doesn't know if the men are armed.
There was a moment where I stopped and thought, these guys have a gun. These guys have a gun.
Amos is risking further harm just by following these men. What if they were leading him to a secluded location where they would hurt him?
Recognizing that I was by myself and being in a city where oftentimes it may take a while for assistance to arrive, I felt all alone.
Then the truck he is chasing suddenly makes a drastic move.
So I'm driving, following. All of a sudden, one door opens. Bang, bang, bang. That's what I was expecting at that moment. I thought this guy's gonna come back and he's gonna shoot me. Worst case scenario, all three of these men were gonna get out of that car and come after me. The number one thing was to make sure that they could not get inside of my vehicle.
But instead of coming after him, the man bolts out of sight.
The suspect got out, and the other guys that were in the vehicle continued on. So the suspect looks like he's going to be running westbound back towards Town Avenue.
Drew, where are you? Where is the suspect vehicle? Is it parked? What does the person look like?
Where is he running? And where are the other two men in the truck headed now?
Where's the driver?
The driver took off.
They could have kicked him out as a way to say, we don't want to go down with you. Or he could have jumped out on his own and said, let me run because I don't want to get caught.
The two men in the truck drive off, so Amos focuses his attention on the man on foot, the one who tried to kill him.
And he is now running westbound, Town and the 60, correct?
Yes. I'm going to follow the guy who actually hit my car and not the suspect vehicle.
That's the guy I gotta go after. I let the car go. My number one concern was stopping the attacker from attacking someone else. At this moment, I'm seeing this guy run, jump, climb over walls, about to access the freeway, and I'm like, this is gonna be bad. This guy's gonna get away.
The suspect was able to disappear, and he no longer had a visual on him.
With his attacker out of sight, Amos pulls into a nearby parking lot to wait for the police. After he shows them his video of the attack, it doesn't take them long to figure out who is behind it.
Within hours, they fingerprinted my entire car, had enough prints to match whom they believed it was.
The man, 26-year-old Jacob McQuana, has an active warrant for felony vandalism.
My attacker was known to police. Police, along with others in the community, worked day and night to find him.
Our undercover task force officers were relentless to solve the crime.
The video Amos took is posted on social media and quickly goes viral. Most people applaud him, but a few warn him that he should have minded his own business.
I'm being told by people, you're a snitch, you're this, you're that. You can't be doing that. That's dangerous.
The ordeal leaves Amos and his family on edge.
I was concerned every single day. I brought in family and friends to walk with me, go to the barber shop with me, to go out with me and eat because I still had to live. And I wasn't gonna let this one attack keep me from enjoying the beauty of my community that I do love.
He actually became a little more attached. Everywhere I went, he wanted to go. And everywhere we went, his eyes are on everything and everybody more than usual. When I saw the video, there were a lot of emotions going on. I felt anger. I was angry at Amos first. Because to me, we're newly engaged. We plan to have a family together. So I'm thinking, come home. Like, don't put yourself in the position to be hurt and not come home to your family. But then the emotions of being proud flooded in. I'm very proud, yet still edgy. Because he has such a big heart, and I don't want his heart to get in the way of his safety.
But Amos is determined to keep speaking out about the incident.
I and so many others will not allow our community to be degraded by any criminal.
Amos wanted to make a difference. He risked his vehicle, he risked his life to stop dumping in the city of Pomona. Everybody wants to clean up their communities. They want to make them safer.
And on August 21st, after almost 2 weeks of hiding from the police, Jacob McQuana turns himself in.
In the end, the pressure just became too much where he couldn't escape anymore.
McQuana is charged with assault with a deadly weapon, felony vandalism, and throwing an object at a moving vehicle with intent to cause great bodily injury.
He was sentenced to 1 year in state prison. He served half time and was released early.
While Amos is uneasy knowing his attacker is back on the streets, he knows he did the right thing.
We need to stop senseless attacks like this from taking place. The buck stops here. It's about being a good neighbor.
In Ohio, a woman decides to be a good neighbor by turning in her own boyfriend.
Tonight, we actually show you a stunning local case that will make you scratch your head a little bit and wonder if what you just saw was indeed real.
March 2010, Cincinnati, Ohio. The Hamilton County Sheriff's Office responds to a bank robbery. And this isn't an isolated incident.
The Cincinnati area had experienced a series of bank robberies. The first string occurred in March and April of 2010.
Whoever is behind them, this robber isn't getting away with much.
Probably less than $15,000 out of all of the robberies. It wasn't a whole lot. I mean, they don't keep that much cash around for this reason.
But the rash of robberies leaves employees terrified.
You got a guy who's threatening you, saying he's got a gun.
On the other side of the counter, on the other side of the glass, those tellers don't know what the robber is capable of, what his intention is. That kind of thing can cause quite a bit of fear and anxiety. All they want to do is just do their job and go home. They don't want to get injured or killed just because somebody decides they're going to rob the bank.
As they try to figure out who is responsible for the robberies, police are only sure of one thing. This is almost certainly the same guy.
They all have one thing in common: the same suspect. He looks exactly the same in every single video. It's a black guy wearing a hood, sunglasses, and he's here to rob the place.
In hopes of identifying him, police released the security videos to the local news.
Police released these photos of the suspect.
They put his photo all over the media. It was all over the news.
He held up multiple tri-state banks, and the surveillance video hit probably every newscast in Cincinnati.
Crime Stoppers is a tip hotline with these pictures. They got many, many calls.
Tipsters tell the police who they believe the suspect was.
Soon, police have a firm ID. They believe the robber is this man, Christopher Askew.
So many people identified Christopher as the wrongdoer. So the police went to his mother's house and they knocked on the door and his mom answered and she said, "I know why you're here. I saw him on TV. He's up in Michigan."
They're greeted by his mother, who immediately assumes that they're there to collect her son because she too thought that the video looked like her son.
He ultimately got arrested in Michigan.
So for law enforcement, mom turning her son in sounds like they got the guy. I mean, you would think that a mother knows her own son or what he's capable of.
Police are convinced they have their guy.
Multiple witnesses and bank associates picked Askew out of a lineup and pointed him out as the suspect.
So at this point, this is an open and shut case. The bandit has been caught. He's been identified by witnesses at multiple locations, caught on CCTV footage, even turned in by his own mother.
Police charge Askew with the robberies. But just when they think this is a closed case, there's a game-changing development.
They get a call from a woman who claims that they got the wrong guy. She says, "It's actually my boyfriend."
If she's right, it means police have a huge problem on their hands.
They arrested the wrong guy.
The real guy was probably kicked up on his couch, living easy with $15,000 in his pocket, thinking he got away with it.
And that isn't all. this case has a shocking twist.
Really spooked a lot of people out.
It's something you would see in a Hollywood movie.
The woman claims her boyfriend is the real bank robber, but that doesn't make any sense because her boyfriend looks nothing like the man police have in custody.
He's actually a white man.
The guy was this Conrad Zadaric. I think he had been in the country a couple of years. He's Eastern European.
When police go to Conrad's home, his girlfriend shows them exactly why she's so certain he is the right bank robber. He has a pile of cash that is covered in red ink, which comes from the dye packets that banks hide in money in case they get robbed.
One of the red dye packets exploded on him. He was using fingernail polish remover to try to get it off. Basically, they found all the evidence they needed.
But that's not all police find. They also recover the mask that Conrad used to disguise himself during the robberies.
Not just any mask, a $1,000 Hollywood mask of a black man.
A Hollywood-grade, full head covering latex mask that hid the fact that the suspect was not a black male, as the mask would indicate, but a skinny white guy.
It looked absolutely nothing like him, wore sunglasses to cover up his blue eyes, put on gloves and some long sleeves and said, "I'm gonna go rob a couple banks today."
He bought it, used it, committed these robberies. And I gotta tell you, this is something we've never seen before. And we handle a lot of cases, but I've never had a theatrical mask used during a series of robberies. And it was so lifelike.
The news anchor that covered this actually propped it up on the desk in the studio.
And we want to show you something. The prosecutor let us borrow this. This is the mask used in that crime. It has been sitting at my desk now for about a week, freaking everyone out.
This mask moved with the movements of the face and the head.
That behaves in such a way that it mimics flesh and muscle. So even when he talked, it looked like a real person.
Really spooked a lot of people out about how absolutely accurate and lifelike this mask looked. Christopher Askew, the initial suspect in this case, looked remarkably similar to what turned out to be a mask.
The story about the creepy mask quickly goes viral.
It's unbelievably lifelike. And the poor guy who just happened to look like it did nothing wrong. Absolutely nothing wrong.
But for all the effort Conrad put into getting the elaborate mask, he apparently didn't pay as much attention to his girlfriend.
He angers his girlfriend, who dimes him out to the police.
That's the one person he should have been nice to after he told her he committed all these robberies. I think she was probably mad at him, but she was more shaken that an innocent person was arrested. And good for her. Christopher was innocent of these robberies.
With the new evidence, witnesses from the banks realize they've been duped, and Christopher Askew is released.
We got Christopher out of jail. Our job is to seek justice, and it was unjust for Christopher to remain in jail a moment longer.
I'm sure when he got out, he felt vindicated, but if I were him, I think I'd be pretty upset with my mom.
Everybody thought it was him, mom included. But if you see the mask, you understand just how lifelike this thing is. It's like they used Christopher for the model for the mask. I mean, it looks just like him.
Since being wrongfully accused, Christopher has stayed out of the spotlight. The police say this case dramatically highlights why eyewitness accounts are not always right.
We've known for a long time that eyewitness testimony can be very, very shaky.
Those are still very valuable tools, witness accounts of what happened. The real lesson here, though, is that those things all by themselves are not as valuable as you may think.
Conrad is charged with 6 counts of robbery.
Once he was found in possession of the mask and they piled on his girlfriend's testimony, Conrad was pretty much done.
Pled guilty to these robbers and is serving a 25-year sentence in one of the Ohio penitentiaries. He's going to be close to 60 when he gets out of prison, but It's scary to think that someone could buy a theatrical mask, misidentify an innocent person.
To this day, police remain stunned by the case. And not just because of that mask.
I think the lesson in this case is don't piss off your girlfriend because she could turn you in on all the robberies.
If you're gonna buy a prosthetic mask, steal a couple $1,000s, maybe buy something nice for your girlfriend. Otherwise, she'll turn you in.
July 17th, 2019, Streetsboro, Ohio.
911, where's your emergency?
Verizon next door is getting robbed.
Verizon's getting robbed, okay.
They had something like bags tied over their faces or something.
This is about as serious as it gets.
Sounds like the individuals are still inside.
A witness who spots thieves going into a store has reported a robbery. As police rush to the scene, surveillance cameras record every move of what looks to be a well-planned hit.
We see 4 people rushing into the store, one after the other, the first one holding a firearm, and then we see duct tape, a tote bag, and even something that looks like a laundry basket.
So they run right to the back of the store and just confront the store clerk right away.
One robber points the gun at the clerk's head and tells him to get down on the ground. And the clerk immediately complied. The other robber starts taping his hands behind his back.
They hit him a couple times. I believe they pistoled him one time, the handgun. They tied him up and they were just hitting him and asking him where the money was and how to get into the safe. The clerk is terrified. He honestly thought he was gonna get shot.
The robbers empty the cash register, then try to crack open the safe.
They're opening anything and everything in the back room of the store, and they're looking for whatever they can steal.
Unable to get into the safe, they try a different approach.
By picking him up from the back of the shirt so that it's essentially choking his neck as they lift him up off the ground. That moment must have been absolutely terrifying.
The clerk was trying to explain to them that the safe will not just open right away. There's safety measures in place in the event that a store is robbed.
The clerk tells the robbers that there's a built-in delay before the safe will open, but they don't want to hear it.
There's a 10-minute delay, so they have to wait for it to open, and they're just getting more frustrated.
To the clerk's relief, as he nervously keeps pushing buttons, the police show up.
I end up being the first officer there, so I just announced Streetsboro Police.
Within a couple minutes, we had 3 police officers on scene at that location.
When I was standing in the doorway, I couldn't see anything in the back. We didn't know how many people were back there, and we didn't know exactly what was going on.
Jason, who is a canine officer, first tries to scare the thieves by threatening to send in his dogs.
Streetsboro Police Canine Unit, send the dog and you'll come out! Get out here now!
This is your final warning. I'm sending my dog and you will be bit.
Come on out!
The robbers definitely heard Officer Mullen.
They were in a panic.
They're looking for a back door, and there is no back door. They're not in control of that building anymore. They are scrambling. They're running around from storage area to bathroom, looking back and forth, back and forth.
In the midst of the confusion, the terrified clerk seizes the opportunity to escape.
He starts running towards me. He had the fear of God in his eyes. As he gets on his knees, I realize that his hands are tied behind his back.
I have an employee bound up. Come on outside. Come outside. Please, they're in the back, please.
The clerk tells police the robbers almost killed him.
They were hitting me in the face right here.
What were they saying when they were doing it?
Just open the safe, open the safe. They weren't believing me because there's a 10-minute time delay saved for this reason. They just weren't believing me and they said that shoot him.
These robbers are dangerous, and police know they must get to them before someone does get hurt. But this is like walking into a trap.
So we were just staring at a blank wall and couldn't see nothing around it.
Hands up down! Come on out! Come on out!
With the clerk safely outside, police are determined to detain the thieves who threaten to kill him.
The moment the clerk took the opportunity to run out of the store, the robbers really lost their control of the situation. Checkmate. It's over for them.
The police continue yelling as they cautiously move inside.
Hands up now! Come on out! Now! Come on out!
It's a very tense moment. We don't know what their intentions are. We don't know how many people there are. We don't know how many weapons there are.
But suddenly, two of the robbers emerge with their hands up.
They're just kind of walking towards us like zombies. We can't see any emotion on them. You can't really tell from their body what's going on. It's a very dangerous moment. Any sudden movement from them, we'd be forced to deal with it.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Anyone else in there?
It would not say anything to us.
The whole time, we are thinking, who else is here? How many guns are there? Are they gonna come for us? Are they just giving up? We don't know.
With two of the bandits now in handcuffs, the officers inch their way towards the back.
It's a very blind corner and you're just slowly edging your way back to see what you can see. When you kind of go around, you're trying to make sure that you're not aiming your gun at someone else.
This is no time to let our guard down.
Greensboro Police, is there anybody else back here?
There are closed doors, there's a desk. Officer Herman and I decide to check a door that's right in front of me first.
I'm gonna open it, you're gonna look, okay? I'm gonna keep my eye over there.
I open the door and there's a robber standing in the doorway with his hands up.
Put your hands up, put your hands up. Got another one in the back.
To open a closet and to see a robber with his hands up. He's got cash in his pockets that he just took out of a cash register. Doesn't get more real or surprising than that.
But that's when Officer Hall gets a glimpse of a fourth robber cowering under a desk.
I seen his feet or something was sticking out.
Walk him to the front. Just walk him to the front.
Roll over on your stomach. You don't got the order, okay?
I'm out of cuffs. I'm out of cuffs.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm giving myself up, yo.
It is pretty pathetic to hide under a desk like that when you come running into a store with such authority and such dominance of really trying to play with someone's life to then be reduced down to hiding under a desk. It kind of looks like they're playing a game of hide and seek, but this isn't a fun one. It's incredibly dangerous.
The police soon determine that they have all the robbers in custody, and that's when they discover exactly how dangerous this situation was.
We found the gun on the table next to where the fourth robber was hiding under the desk. It was a loaded semi-automatic pistol.
It turns out that all four of the suspects are teenagers. Two of them, who are 17, go to prison for armed robbery and kidnapping. The others, who are only 16, are sent to the Ohio Youth Detention Center until they turn 21.
The two that touched the gun were sentenced to prison. The courts decided that your age is not going to play as big of a role as it may had you not touched the gun.
The quick and decisive action of the police earns them big praise.
The police chief is applauding the 911 caller and his officers for stopping these teens within minutes.
They call it luck.
This is the first time I have run into a situation where a store is being robbed and we get there and the person that's robbing the store is still in the store. Why would they still be here?
But it gets them national exposure.
It's very rare that we see the cops show up in time to actually stop a crime, and good for them for doing so.
The Streetsboro officers have to commend them for doing an incredible job being able to apprehend all four juvenile suspects.
We're very surprised that the video went viral and that type of thing just doesn't happen here.
It's amazing that in this case, nothing happened, and it is truly a testament to the police who did their work very seamlessly.
As for the store clerk who was tied up by the robbers, who was asked not to be publicly identified, he can't thank the police enough.
He was very traumatized, but he was very appreciative that we were there to save him.
He has told us numerous times that we have saved his life, and he will always be very grateful for us. I don't think any of us here consider ourselves heroes, There are a lot more people out there that are more accepting of that title. I'm very happy that nobody was hurt.
In Maryland, a young woman is saved by the camera on her cell phone.
She was filming a TikTok video when the unthinkable happened.
November 22nd, 2020, Hagerstown, Maryland, 10 p.m. 25-year-old Hannah Viverette is unwinding in her favorite way.
I did a lot of meditation and a lot of dancing, which is also how I release some energy.
As she often does, Hannah is filming herself so she can post her dance on social media.
And I started recording. Now, this was like a good solid 20 minutes.
But then, her night takes a sudden and terrifying turn.
I heard this crack. I immediately knew that it was my balcony door because it made a very distinct noise when it would crack open.
Hannah thinks, oh, it's just the wind, because the door had never been properly repaired. So sometimes when there's a huge gust of wind, the door would creak and come open. She begins to walk towards the door to close it, when all of a sudden it starts to push back open. Hannah lives on the second floor, so it was extremely frightening to her.
Hannah is no longer alone.
As she sees the door begin to push all the way open, that's when she begins to realize there's a guy standing here. There's a guy trying to enter my apartment.
Just so many different emotions. First off, I'm thinking I'm dead.
Who are you? In a panic, Hannah reaches for her phone, which is still recording.
The only reason that I grabbed my cell phone was 911. I take my phone and I flash it at him because I was like, ding, 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 bright idea. I just realized my phone was recording.
So what begins as a social media post actually ends up to be evidence against the stalker who enters her apartment.
Shaking, Hannah screams out.
Who are you? Please get out. Please get out.
She yells at the intruder, shouting at the intruder to get out of her apartment.
Still, she's almost paralyzed with fear.
Is he here to kidnap her? Is he here to assault her? Is he here to murder her?
Whatever he wants, when Hannah gets a better look at his face, she's in shock.
He lived across the street. He lived in the complex.
And this man has always given Hannah the creeps.
If I was on my balcony, he would stop his vehicle in the roadway and he would like shout at me. I never talked to him. I never said a word to him. And he would do his weird, creepy smile. He would just stare and smile at me.
This intruder was a classic stalker. Hannah remembers him, seeing him around the complex, observing that he was watching her, trying to establish Hannah's movements.
Even scarier, it looks like this intruder could be armed.
He had both of his hands in his pockets and smiling at me and like just mumbling some crap. Please get out. Yes.
She realizes his hands aren't visible. At this point, she's even more frightened. Could it be a knife? Could it be some other weapon?
I was standing at the doorway and the whole time I'm thinking he's gonna pull out a gun and shoot me.
This is like a nightmare.
No, please get out.
He says to her, I'm your friend. But it's obvious that his intention here is to harm Hannah.
And Hannah's worst fear is that he wants to kidnap her and take her somewhere else.
That is absolutely when it goes from a dangerous situation to a deadly situation.
Hannah is desperate to escape the frightening intruder.
She's slowly transitioning from her shock into a position where she can take control of the situation.
The man keeps insisting that he's Hannah's friend.
She's like, I'm not your friend. I don't know you. And as she says so, she begins to back out of her doorway.
With her phone in hand, Hannah makes a bold escape.
Please get out of my apartment right now.
running to a neighbor's apartment.
Hello? Please come in. Thankfully, her neighbor heard her yell and came to the door.
That's when the man finally retreats.
As Hannah begins to run, he begins to exit just how he came, from the balcony.
As soon as I got into my neighbors, I ended that recording and dialed 911.
Hello, this is the 911 operator.
While she waits for the police, Hannah remembers something that gives her chills.
And I'm piecing things together, realizing all of the sketchy that has happened, that I have been having really weird feelings. I used to come home in the middle of the day and there would be like random pieces of paper.
She'd come home and see that her personal belongings had been moved around. It was almost as if someone had been coming into her unit, hanging out, and then leaving.
Most disturbing is a small, unfamiliar book she once found next to her couch.
I went to bed one night and I woke up in the middle of the night. I saw this random notebook lying on my couch. So I look at this notebook, I take pictures of it. Thank God I took pictures of it. It's got like names and checklists. So I'm like, who the is in my apartment?
At the time, Hannah tries to dismiss it, thinking maybe someone from maintenance left it there during the day. But police believe the incidents are related. And soon, they identify a suspect, Angel Rodriguez Gomez, a former handyman at the complex.
Angel was the same name as the guy's name on the cover of that maintenance log that she found.
Top of the notebook, clear as day, says prepared by Angel.
As a maintenance worker, his job was to go into each person's unit to repair items. So as a result, he had the ability to enter and leave any unit throughout the complex.
Of course, not all maintenance and landscaping people are nefarious criminals. However, those that are have the opportunity to become familiar with you, with your environment, with your residence, with the layout, and even later on, possibly even an avenue of escape. This person, as a maintenance employee, had unparalleled opportunity to enter that home.
I felt so violated. It was disgusting. So much anxiety and fear.
Angel is charged with stalking, burglary, second-degree assault, and malicious destruction of property.
One of the most frightening things about the ordeal is that it was discovered that Angel was wielding a knife. He used a knife to cut her Christmas lights that she had decorating the bars of her second floor balcony.
He cuts a section of Christmas lights and brings them with him as he enters the apartment. For what? Any action performed before and related to any kind of offense or any kind of crime can establish the intent later on during the investigation.
What's more, Hannah doesn't seem to be the only person Angel has targeted. Other residents in her complex also come forward with disturbing stories about him. They thank Hannah for getting him arrested, but then something shocking happens.
The suspect got out on bail. Bail obviously is not a punitive measure because you're innocent until proven guilty. Bail is only there to ensure that the suspect shows up for the court proceedings later on. But in cases like this, what it did was put a potentially dangerous suspect back out on the street.
Like nothing happened and then get out and just walk. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. No freaking way.
Hannah was informed by her complex that Angel would be given 30 days notice to leave. 30 days notice was ridiculous.
Knowing that her stalker is still in her apartment complex is horrifying for Hannah.
We all know that when someone has a pending case against you where you could be facing life in prison, the best way to get rid of a case is to get rid of the witness. I was terrified for Hannah's safety.
I was so pissed off. I'm like, you can't be for real right now. He's not gonna get away with this.
That's when Hannah decides to take her story public.
New details emerging tonight after a woman recording a TikTok video spotted an intruder breaking into her apartment.
I ended up posting this to my Facebook, my personal Facebook and my Instagram account. And TikTok, 17 hours later, it's had like 1.1 million likes.
Hannah's video also catches the attention of immigration officials.
ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, discovered Angel was not a U.S. citizen.
He is promptly arrested again and is now awaiting trial. In the meantime, Hannah has taken up martial arts,
which has been freaking amazing. You know, I'm going to feel a lot more better putting my head down on my pillow at night.
And Hannah just hopes her story will inspire other women to always protect themselves.
I'm just so grateful that I'm able to share this with so many people.
It begins with a phone call that never should have happened. February 1995. A bitter wind sweeps across the quiet neighborhoods of northern Ohio, rattling bare tree branches against frost-covered windows. The kind of cold that bites through coats, through skin, through bone. The kind of cold that makes people stay inside, lock their doors early, and wait for morning. At 7:42 p.m., a payphone rings inside a small convenience store on the edge of town. The clerk doesn't answer it. The phone keeps ringing. Outside, a single car idles in the parking lot, exhaust drifting like smoke into the freezing night. No one notices the man standing near the phone booth across the street. No one notices when he disappears. And by morning, the entire town will wake up to a headline that will haunt it for decades. A missing person. A young woman.
No witnesses.
No answers. Just the beginning of what investigators would later call one of Ohio's most chilling cold cases. Her name was Emily Carter, 23 years old, a college graduate with a part-time job at the county records office and a reputation for being the kind of person who never caused trouble. Friends described her as quiet but sharp, observant, the kind of person who noticed details others missed. She lived alone in a small apartment just outside the center of town, a brick building from the 1970s with creaking staircases and thin walls that carried every sound. On the night she vanished, nothing seemed unusual. At 6:15 p.m., Emily left work. At 6:32 p.m., a coworker saw her getting into her car in the parking lot. At 7:03 p.m., a cashier at a gas station remembers selling her a cup of coffee. Then the timeline breaks. The last confirmed sighting happens just after 7:30 p.m. Emily's car was seen turning onto a quiet residential road only a few miles from her apartment. A normal drive. A familiar route. A road she had taken hundreds of times before. But she never arrived home. At first, no one panicked. Adults sometimes stayed out late. Phones died. Plans changed. But when Emily failed to show up for work the next morning, something felt wrong. By noon, coworkers began calling hospitals. By 3 p.m., her parents were notified. And by evening, police officially opened a missing person investigation. Within hours, officers searched her apartment. The scene was eerie in its normalcy. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter. Her coat hung by the door. The television remote rested neatly beside the couch. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked forced. But Emily wasn't there. Her car wasn't there either. And that changed everything. Missing person cases often hinge on vehicles. Cars leave trails. Tire marks. Traffic cameras. Witness sightings. But in 1995, technology was limited. No license plate readers. No digital tracking. Just officers knocking on doors, asking neighbors the same question over and over. Did you see anything unusual? Most people hadn't. Until 3 days later. A farmer driving along an old service road spotted something strange in a wooded ditch nearly 10 miles outside town. A car. Partially hidden by brush. Covered in frost. Engine cold. Windows fogged with condensation. When deputies arrived, they immediately recognized it. Emily Carter's sedan. The driver's door was slightly open. Inside, the car looked abandoned in a hurry. Her coffee cup sat in the cup holder, half empty. Her keys were still in the ignition. And the driver's seat was pushed back farther than Emily normally kept it. Investigators stood in silence. Something about the scene felt wrong. Emily was 5'4". The seat position suggested someone much taller had been sitting there. But there were no signs of struggle. No shattered glass. No blood. No clear evidence of what had happened inside that car. Just silence. And cold air. Police expanded the search immediately. Dogs combed through nearby woods. Volunteers lined up shoulder to shoulder across frozen fields. Helicopters circled overhead. But the land revealed nothing. No footprints. No discarded clothing. No body. Emily Carter had vanished without leaving a single clear trace behind. The town reacted the way small towns always do when something unthinkable happens. Fear spread quickly. Parents kept their children indoors. Stores closed earlier. Neighbors began watching each other with quiet suspicion. Because if Emily hadn't run away, if she hadn't chosen to disappear, then someone in that community had taken her. And that meant the danger was still out there. Detectives began working the case around the clock. They interviewed friends, co-workers, ex-boyfriends, anyone who had crossed paths with Emily in the weeks before she vanished. Most leads went nowhere. Emily had no known enemies, no criminal history, no obvious secrets. But one detail caught investigators' attention. 2 weeks before her disappearance, Emily had filed a public records request at work, a routine task for someone in her job. Except the file she requested was unusual. It involved property records tied to a series of abandoned houses outside town, old buildings scheduled for demolition. At first glance, nothing about the request seemed suspicious, until detectives discovered something else. Emily had copied several pages from that file, and those copies were missing. They weren't in her apartment. They weren't in her desk at work. They had simply vanished, which raised a question no one could answer. What had Emily Carter found in those documents? And who might have wanted those papers gone? Investigators tried to track down anyone connected to the properties listed in the records. One name appeared repeatedly: a local contractor. A man known around town for buying old properties cheaply, renovating them, then selling them months later. His name was Daniel Hargrove. At first, he seemed cooperative, friendly even. He told police he barely knew Emily, said he might have seen her once or twice at the records office. Nothing more. He had an alibi for the night she disappeared. Dinner with friends. Several people confirmed it. And with no physical evidence linking him to the case, detectives had no reason to pursue him further. Still, something about his name lingered in the investigation. Weeks passed. Search efforts slowed. News coverage faded. But Emily's parents refused to give up. They printed flyers, organized volunteer searches, appeared on local television begging for information. Someone, somewhere, knew what had happened, but no one came forward. Months turned into a year. Then 2. Then 5. The case file grew thick with dead ends. Leads that collapsed under scrutiny. Witnesses who remembered nothing. Evidence that led nowhere. Eventually, the investigation received a new label. One that detectives hate more than almost anything: cold case. It didn't mean the search had stopped. It meant the trail had gone cold. And sometimes, once a case reaches that point, it stays there forever. But in the evidence locker of the county sheriff's office, inside a sealed plastic bag, there was one item investigators had never fully understood. A single photograph, found tucked inside Emily Carter's desk drawer at work. A photograph of an abandoned house, taken sometime in winter. The windows boarded, the paint peeling, and written on the back, in Emily's handwriting, were 3 simple words: "Something is wrong." For 25 years, no one knew what she meant, until a detective reviewing the cold case file noticed a detail no one had seen before. A small shape in the corner of the photograph. A reflection. In a broken window. The faint outline of a man standing behind the camera. Watching. Waiting. And suddenly, the forgotten evidence in a decades-old cold case began pointing toward a truth no one in that quiet Ohio town was ready to face. Because if that reflection meant what investigators feared it meant, then Emily Carter hadn't simply disappeared. She had discovered something. Something dangerous enough that someone had silenced her. And the person responsible might have been living in that community the entire time. Watching. Listening. Waiting for the world to forget. But the world had not forgotten. and the cold case was about to reopen. For 25 years, the photograph sat untouched in an evidence bag, buried inside a cardboard box stacked among hundreds of forgotten case files in the sheriff's storage room. Dust gathered on the lid. Paper yellowed with time. Names faded into obscurity. But some cases never truly disappear. They wait, quietly, patiently, waiting for the one detail someone finally sees. Detective Mark Ellison had not originally intended to reopen the Carter case. In fact, the file only landed on his desk because the department had begun digitizing old investigations, one of those bureaucratic modernization efforts meant to clear shelves and archive the past. Most detectives skimmed through the files quickly, scanning documents, labeling evidence, then moving on. But something about Emily Carter's case felt different the moment Ellison opened the folder. Maybe it was the photographs. Maybe it was the absence of answers. Or maybe it was the uneasy feeling that someone had gotten away with something terrible. Ellison had worked homicide for nearly 12 years. He knew the difference between a mystery and a mistake. And this case felt like the latter, something overlooked, something missed, something hiding in plain sight. When he reached the photograph from Emily's desk drawer, he paused. The abandoned house looked ordinary enough at first glance. Old siding peeling away. Window boards nailed crookedly across cracked glass. Snow covering the yard like a blanket pulled too tight over something buried beneath. But Ellison noticed something the earlier investigators apparently hadn't. A distortion in the window pane. He leaned closer. Not a crack. A reflection. Barely visible unless the light hit the photograph at exactly the right angle. A figure. Tall. Standing several feet behind the camera. Watching. Ellison felt a small chill crawl up his spine. Because the reflection meant something simple and terrifying. Emily Carter had not been alone when she took that photograph. Someone had been standing behind her. And that person had either known she was there or had been following her. The original investigation files showed that police had searched several abandoned properties listed in the records Emily had accessed before she vanished. But most of those searches had been quick, limited, conducted in the early days when detectives were scrambling to follow every possible lead. No major evidence had been found. No witnesses had reported seeing Emily near those locations. But that photograph proved something else entirely. She had been there, inside, or near at least one of those abandoned buildings. And she had believed something was wrong. Ellison requested the original property records tied to the case. The documents were old, printed on fading paper, listing addresses scattered across the rural outskirts of the county. Houses abandoned during the economic downturn of the late 1980s. Structures scheduled for demolition or resale. One name appeared repeatedly in the purchase history. Daniel Hargrove. Ellison had seen the name before while reading the case file. The contractor who had bought several of those properties decades earlier. The man who had provided a solid alibi the night Emily disappeared. The man investigators had briefly questioned, then eliminated. Ellison leaned back in his chair. Cold cases often collapsed because detectives trusted early assumptions too much. Once someone was cleared, investigators rarely returned to them unless new evidence emerged. But what if the original investigators had been wrong? Ellison drove out to one of the abandoned properties the next afternoon. Most of the houses listed in the 1995 records no longer existed. They had been demolished, replaced by warehouses, storage lots, or simply reclaimed by weeds and time. But one property still stood. Barely. The house matched the one in Emily's photograph. The siding had decayed further. The windows were shattered completely now, boards hanging loose like broken teeth. The yard had grown wild with tall grass and thorny brush. The place felt abandoned in the way only truly forgotten buildings do. Silent. Heavy. Watching. Ellison stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath his boots. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight cutting through the broken roof. Old furniture remained scattered across the rooms. Mold-covered couches. A cracked dining table. Stacks of newspapers dated years after Emily's disappearance. But something about the back room caught his attention. The floorboards had been replaced. Not recently, but noticeably newer than the rest of the house. Ellison crouched down, running a finger along the edge of one board. Different wood. Different nails. Someone had repaired or hidden something here. He photographed the area and contacted the department. Within hours, a small forensic team arrived. Carefully, methodically, they removed the floorboards. Underneath, the soil had been disturbed. Loose. Dark. One of the technicians looked up. "You think it's a burial site?" Ellison didn't answer immediately, because something else was already troubling him. If Emily Carter had been buried here, someone had gone through significant effort to hide her body. But the house had never been thoroughly searched during the original investigation. Why? He checked the old reports again that evening. The search team in 1995 had inspected the building. Briefly, but the back room had been locked. According to the report, they had not forced entry because the property owner had not granted permission at the time. The owner listed on the records that year was Daniel Hargrove. Ellison felt the cold case tightening around a single name. But the excavation the next morning produced something unexpected. They did find bones beneath the floor. Human bones. But the remains were incomplete. And worse, they were far older than Emily Carter. The forensic examiner estimated the skeleton had been buried there at least 40 years earlier, long before Emily had even been born, which meant two things. First, the house had been connected to something dark long before the Carter case. And second, Emily had likely discovered it. She had taken a photograph of the building, written "something is wrong" on the back, and then she had disappeared. Ellison now believed she had stumbled into something dangerous. But the question remained. Who had been standing behind her when she took that picture? He returned to the photograph again, this time enlarging the reflection digitally. The outline became slightly clearer. Tall man. Broad shoulders. Something on his head. At first, Ellison assumed it was a hat. But when the forensic imaging specialist enhanced the contrast, the shape became more defined. Not a hat. A construction helmet. Ellison stared at the image. Because only a few people would have had reason to wear a hard hat near that property. Construction workers. Contractors. Property developers. People like Daniel Hargrove. Ellison dug deeper into Hargrove's past. The contractor had built a modest real estate business during the 1990s, flipping abandoned houses. Records showed he had purchased at least 15 properties around the county over a 10-year span. But something strange appeared when Ellison compared the dates. 3 of those properties had unusual gaps in ownership. Short periods where the houses had been temporarily transferred between shell companies before returning to Hargrove's control. The same 3 properties were all listed in the records Emily Carter had requested 2 weeks before she vanished. Ellison printed the addresses. Then he looked at a county map. The 3 locations formed a triangle around a stretch of rural farmland about 12 miles outside town. Right in the center of that triangle sat an old gravel quarry that had closed in the late 1980s. Abandoned land. Miles of empty terrain. A perfect place for someone who didn't want to be seen. Ellison requested aerial photographs of the quarry property taken around 1995. When the images arrived, he studied them carefully. One detail stood out immediately. A narrow dirt road leading from the quarry to one of Hargrove's abandoned houses. The same house in Emily's photograph. Ellison felt the investigation shift in his mind. Emily Carter had not randomly photographed that building. She had been documenting something. Something connected to those properties. Something someone desperately wanted hidden. But before Ellison could pursue the lead further, a new development arrived that shook the entire investigation. Forensic analysis had finally finished examining the skeleton discovered beneath the house. And the results were nothing anyone expected. The remains belonged to a woman who had vanished in 1971. A missing person case that had also gone unsolved. Another disappearance. Another woman. Another cold case buried beneath the same property. Suddenly, Emily Carter's investigation was no longer one mystery. It was 2. And if one body had been hidden beneath that house, Detective Ellison began to wonder how many others might still be out there. Buried. Forgotten. Waiting. Because cold cases rarely exist in isolation. Sometimes they are only the visible edge of something far darker. something that had been hiding in that quiet Ohio county for decades. And someone out there knew exactly where the rest of the truth was buried. The discovery of the skeleton beneath the abandoned house changed everything. For decades, the Carter investigation had been treated as a disappearance, a tragic mystery, a single unresolved cold case that slowly faded into the background of local memory. But when forensic analysts confirmed the identity of the remains buried under the floorboards, the narrative shifted in a way that sent a quiet shockwave through the sheriff's department. The woman buried beneath that house had a name.
Margaret Hale.
She had vanished in 1971, 24 years before Emily Carter disappeared. The original case file was thin, barely 30 pages. A few grainy photographs, handwritten notes from detectives long retired or long dead. Margaret had been 26 years old, a waitress at a roadside diner outside town. One night after finishing her shift, she had simply never made it home. At the time, police believed she might have run away or left town voluntarily. It had been the early 70s. People disappeared sometimes. Lives changed. Records were harder to track. The investigation stalled quickly. Eventually, Margaret Hale joined the long list of missing persons whose cases quietly closed without answers. Until now, Detective Mark Ellison sat at his desk staring at the two photographs side by side. Emily Carter, 1995.
Margaret Hale,
1971. Two women separated by nearly a quarter century. Both vanished without explanation. Both connected to the same property. And if Margaret's body had been hidden beneath that floor decades earlier, then one disturbing possibility began to surface. Emily Carter might not have been the first person to uncover something wrong in that house. She might have been the second. Ellison reopened the Hale case immediately. The first step was simple. Find out who owned the property in 1971. The county archive building smelled like dust and old paper. Rows of steel cabinets held decades of property records dating back to the 1950s. A clerk helped Ellison retrieve the ownership files connected to the address. The house had changed hands several times over the years. But in 1971, the year Margaret Hale disappeared, the property belonged to a man named Victor Langford. The name meant nothing to Ellison, but the occupation listed beside it caught his attention. Construction foreman. Ellison felt the pattern forming. Another man tied to building sites. Another connection to abandoned structures. Another possible link to the contractor who owned the house decades later. Daniel Hargrove. Ellison checked the records again. Victor Langford had sold the property in 1974.
The buyer?
A small real estate company that eventually folded. And 10 years later, the property ended up in the hands of Daniel Hargrove. At first glance, it looked like coincidence. But coincidences in cold cases rarely stay coincidences for long. Ellison began digging deeper into Langford's history. Victor Langford had died in 1989. Heart attack. No criminal record. No major investigations tied to his name. Just a quiet life working construction projects around northern Ohio. But when Ellison looked through archived newspaper clippings from the early 1970s, something unexpected appeared. A short article buried on page 6 of a local paper. The headline read, "Diner waitress disappears after late shift."
Margaret Hale.
The article included a brief quote from police at the time. One detail jumped out immediately. Margaret had last been seen speaking with a man in the diner parking lot shortly before she vanished. The witness description was vague.
Tall.
Work boots. Construction jacket. The kind of clothing worn by half the men in town at the time. But the article mentioned something else. The man had been driving a pickup truck belonging to a construction company working nearby. Ellison checked old business registrations tied to Victor Langford. Sure enough, Langford had supervised several construction crews in the area during that period. The connection was thin, but it existed. And now Ellison had two disappearances tied to the same property and two men connected to construction. Langford. And decades later, Daniel Hargrove. But another troubling question emerged. If Emily Carter had discovered Margaret Hale's burial site in 1995, how had she known where to look? Ellison returned to the missing documents from Emily's desk. the copies she had made from county property records. Those papers had vanished the same night she disappeared. Someone had taken them, which meant someone had known exactly what she was investigating. Ellison requested phone records connected to the county records office from early 1995. Most had long since been destroyed, but a few billing summaries still existed in storage. He combed through the logs looking for anything unusual, and there it was. A series of phone calls made from the records office landline to a construction company owned by Daniel Hargrove. 3 calls, all placed by Emily Carter. 2 weeks before she vanished. Ellison leaned back slowly. Emily hadn't just been researching the abandoned houses. She had been contacting the man who owned them, which meant she had questions. And possibly suspicions. Ellison tracked down one of Emily's former coworkers, a woman named Linda Matthews, who had worked in the records office during the 1990s. They met at a small cafe near the courthouse. At first, Linda struggled to remember details from 30 years earlier. But when Ellison mentioned the abandoned property records, something clicked. Yes, she said quietly. Emily was working on something strange. Ellison leaned forward. What do you mean? Linda stirred her coffee slowly, thinking. She said some of the ownership records didn't make sense. How so? Properties changing hands too fast, companies appearing and disappearing, names repeating across different files. Ellison felt the tension tighten. Did she mention Hargrove? Linda nodded. Yes. That was one of the names she kept bringing up. Did she ever say why? Linda hesitated. Then she said something that made Ellison's pulse quicken. She thought someone was hiding something in those houses. Ellison stared at her. What kind of something? Linda shook her head. She didn't say exactly, but I remember she joked about it once. What did she say? Linda looked uneasy. She said if you wanted to bury something where no one would ever find it, abandoned houses would be the perfect place. The words hung in the air between them. Ellison suddenly understood the photograph in a new way. Emily Carter hadn't been randomly exploring those buildings. She had been investigating them, searching, looking for proof that something terrible had happened inside those properties. And if Margaret Hale's body had been hidden beneath one of them, then Emily might have uncovered the truth, which meant someone had needed to stop her. Ellison returned to the enhanced photograph again. The reflection of the man in the broken window. Hot. Broad shoulders. Standing behind Emily. Watching. Waiting. And now, for the first time in 25 years, the cold case felt like it was moving again. But as Ellison began preparing a formal request to reopen the Carter investigation, a new piece of information surfaced that shifted the case in a direction no one expected. One of the retired detectives who had originally worked the disappearance contacted the department after hearing about the discovery beneath the abandoned house. His name was Frank Doyle. And when Ellison met him the following day, Doyle said something that made the room fall silent. There was another witness back then, Doyle said. Ellison frowned. The file doesn't mention anyone else. Doyle sighed heavily. That's because the witness refused to give a statement. Who was it? Doyle rubbed his face slowly, as if the memory still bothered him after all these years. A kid, he said. 14 years old at the time. Ellison felt a sudden shift of anticipation. What did he see? Doyle looked directly at him. He said he saw Emily Carter arguing with a man near the abandoned house. Ellison's voice tightened. Did he recognize the man? Doyle nodded once. Yes. Ellison leaned forward. Who was it? Doyle took a breath. The contractor who owned the property. Daniel Hargrove. And suddenly the cold case that had remained frozen for decades was beginning to thaw. Because somewhere out there, that witness was now a grown man. And if he was willing to talk after all these years, he might finally reveal what happened on the night Emily Carter disappeared. The name of the witness had never appeared in the official Carter case file. For 25 years, that detail had remained buried in the memory of a retired detective who believed, at the time, that the boy's story would lead nowhere. Teenagers sometimes imagine things. Witness accounts changed. And without physical evidence, the investigation had focused elsewhere. But now the circumstances had changed. Two cold cases were suddenly connected. A body had been found beneath an abandoned property. And the man who owned that property, Daniel Hargrove, had been the last person a witness claimed to see with Emily Carter. Detective Mark Ellison needed to find that witness. Frank Doyle still had an old notebook from the 1995 investigation. The pages were yellowed and curling at the edges, filled with quick handwritten notes and phone numbers long disconnected. He flipped through it slowly until he reached a page near the back. There, Doyle said quietly. A name. Caleb Mercer. 14 years old in 1995. Lived with his mother in a small farmhouse just half a mile from the abandoned house where Emily had taken the photograph. According to Doyle's notes, Caleb had been riding his bike along the dirt road the evening Emily disappeared. He claimed he saw a woman standing near the house arguing with a man beside a pickup truck. At the time, he didn't know the woman was Emily Carter, but he recognized the man. Everyone in that part of the county knew Daniel Hargrove. The problem was that Caleb had refused to give a formal statement. His mother insisted he might have been mistaken. Detectives had pressed him briefly, but the story remained vague, uncertain. Without evidence tying Hargrove to the disappearance, the investigation moved on. The notebook contained one more piece of information: an address. Ellison drove there the next morning. The farmhouse was still standing, though it looked older now, leaning slightly toward the gravel driveway like a tired man. Rusted farm equipment sat in the yard. A faded pickup truck was parked beside a small barn. A man in his 40s stepped outside when Ellison knocked.
Tall.
Broad shoulders. Weathered face. Years of outdoor work etched into his skin. Caleb Mercer. When Ellison introduced himself and mentioned Emily Carter's name, Mercer froze. The silence that followed stretched long enough to feel heavy. "I wonder if someone would come back about that someday," Mercer finally said. Ellison asked if they could talk. Mercer nodded slowly and led him inside. The living room was quiet, dimly lit by afternoon sunlight slipping through dusty curtains. They sat across from each other at a wooden table that had probably been there since Mercer's childhood. Ellison didn't waste time. "You told police you saw Emily Carter the night she disappeared." Mercer stared at the table. "I told them what I thought I saw." "What did you actually see?" Mercer exhaled slowly. "I was riding my bike home. It was getting dark. I remember seeing headlights near that abandoned house down the road." Ellison waited. Mercer continued. "There was a truck parked there. I slowed down because it was strange seeing anyone out there that late." "Did you see Emily?" Mercer nodded.
Yeah.
She was standing near the driver's side door. Looked upset, like she was arguing. "With Hargrove?" "Yes." Ellison felt the tension in the room shift. What were they arguing about? Mercer shook his head. "I couldn't hear everything, but she sounded angry. Not scared, at least, not at first." "Did you hear any words clearly?" Mercer hesitated. Then he said something that sent a quiet shock through the investigation. "She kept saying, 'I know what you did.'" Ellison leaned forward. "Are you sure?" Mercer nodded. "I remember that part clearly." "What did Hargrove say?" Mercer's jaw tightened slightly. He told her she didn't understand what she was getting involved in. The room fell silent. Ellison's mind raced through the implications. If Emily had confronted Hargrove that night, it meant her investigation into the abandoned properties had led directly to him. She believed he had done something. Something connected to the house. Something connected to Margaret Hale's burial site. What happened next? Ellison asked. Mercer looked uneasy. "I didn't stick around long. I was a kid. I figured it wasn't my business." "But you saw something else." Mercer's eyes lifted slowly. "Yes."
"What?"
Mercer's voice lowered. "When I rode past them, Hargrove looked straight at me." Ellison felt the words settle like a weight. "What kind of look?" Mercer rubbed his hands together slowly. "The kind that tells you to keep riding." "And you did?" "Yes." Mercer paused. "But when I looked back down the road, I saw him grab her arm." Ellison's pulse quickened. "What happened after that?" Mercer shook his head. "I didn't see anything else. I rode home." "Did you tell your mother?" "Yes." "And she told you to stay out of it?" Mercer nodded again. She said I must have misunderstood what I saw. Said it wasn't our business. Ellison knew that kind of fear well. Small towns sometimes protected their own silence. But Mercer wasn't finished. There's something else, he said quietly. Ellison looked up.
What?
Mercer leaned back in his chair. The next day I rode past that house again. And the truck was gone. Ellison waited. Mercer swallowed. But the front door was open. Ellison's voice dropped. Did you go inside? Mercer hesitated for several seconds. Then he nodded. Just a little. What did you see? Mercer's eyes moved toward the window, as if the memory still lived somewhere outside. There was dirt on the floor. Fresh dirt, like someone had been digging. Ellison felt a cold realization creeping in. Where? The back room. The same room where Margaret Hale's skeleton had been discovered beneath the floorboards. Mercer continued quietly. I didn't understand it back then. I just thought someone was fixing the house or something. But now you realize what it might have been. Mercer nodded slowly. Yeah. Ellison felt the case shifting again. For 25 years, investigators had believed Emily Carter disappeared somewhere on the road between her workplace and her apartment. But Mercer's testimony suggested something very different. Emily had confronted Daniel Hargrove at the abandoned house. She had accused him of something. And the next day, fresh dirt appeared inside the building. The implications were chilling. Because if Hargrove had already buried one victim beneath that house decades earlier, he might have done it again. Ellison left the farmhouse with Mercer's formal statement recorded and signed. But one question still gnawed at him as he drove back toward town. If Emily Carter had been buried beneath that house, forensic teams should have found her remains when they excavated the floor. But they hadn't. Only Margaret Hale's skeleton had been discovered, which meant one of two things. Either Mercer had been mistaken about what he saw, or someone had moved Emily Carter's body. And if that was true, then somewhere else in that quiet Ohio county there might be another hidden grave waiting to be uncovered. But before Ellison could begin searching for it, another unexpected piece of evidence emerged from the past. During the digitization of the Carter case files, a technician discovered something strange buried within an old evidence envelope that had not been opened since 1995. Inside was a small cassette tape. No label, no documentation, just a handwritten note on the envelope. Found in Carter vehicle. Ellison held the tape in his hand, feeling the plastic edges worn smooth by time. No one had ever logged the contents. No one had ever listened to it. For 25 years, the recording had remained silent in an evidence locker. Until now. And if the tape contained what Ellison feared it might contain, then the voice of Emily Carter herself might still be waiting to tell investigators exactly what she discovered before she vanished. The cassette tape looked ordinary. Cheap plastic casing. Clear window scratched from years of storage. The kind of blank tape people used in the 1990s for everything, recording lectures, saving favorite songs from the radio, leaving reminders for themselves. But this one had been sitting in an evidence envelope for 25 years. Found inside Emily Carter's car. Never logged. Never played. Detective Mark Ellison turned it slowly in his hand under the fluorescent lights of the evidence room. Sometimes cold cases didn't move forward because investigators missed a clue. Other times the clue had been there all along, waiting quietly for someone to notice it. The department still had an old cassette player in storage. The device hummed faintly when the technician plugged it in, its plastic buttons yellowed with age. Ellison placed the tape inside and pressed play. At first there was only static. A long hiss filled the room. Then the sound of a car engine. Ellison leaned closer. The recording quality was rough, muffled by background noise. Tires rolled over gravel somewhere. A faint clicking sound suggested the recorder had been placed on a dashboard or seat. And then a voice. Emily Carter. Soft, slightly breathless. This is February 15th. I think. A pause. I'm not even sure why I'm recording this. I guess just in case. Ellison felt a slow tension tighten in his chest. Emily continued speaking, her voice low but steady. I've been looking through the county records for 2 weeks now, and something isn't right. these houses, they keep changing ownership. Same names showing up under different companies. It doesn't make sense. The car engine noise grew louder as if she had accelerated. I called Hargrove today, she said. Pretended I was confirming paperwork. He sounded nervous. A small laugh followed. Nervous people make mistakes. Another pause. Then her tone changed slightly. I think I know where one of the houses is. Allison exchanged a quick glance with the technician. The recording crackled. Wind noise filled the background. I'm going to check it out tonight. The words hung in the room like a warning from the past. Emily continued. If I'm right, if what I saw in those records means what I think it means. She hesitated. Then she whispered something that made Ellison feel the weight of the entire investigation pressing forward. I think someone buried something there. The tape continued. Car tires crunching over gravel. The engine slowing. Emily speaking again, quieter now. I'm almost there. A faint metallic sound echoed, maybe a car door opening. Wind rushed against the microphone. Then footsteps. Ellison could hear them clearly. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Emily's breathing grew slightly heavier. I'm standing outside the house, she whispered. A door creaked somewhere nearby. The sound was sharp and sudden. Emily gasped softly. I didn't expect it to be open. Another pause. Footsteps again, slower now. The wooden floorboards groaned faintly beneath her weight. Ellison felt the tension in the room rising. Emily's voice came through the recorder again. Something smells wrong in here. Silence filled the tape for several seconds. Then a sudden thump echoed faintly in the background. Emily froze. Hello. Her voice sounded cautious now. The recorder picked up the sound of movement deeper inside the house. A faint scraping noise. Then a man's voice.
Low. Come.
Didn't expect to see anyone here tonight. Ellison felt the air leave his lungs. The voice wasn't loud enough to be clearly identifiable, but the tone carried something unmistakable. Control. Emily's response came quickly. Daniel? The room went silent. Ellison stared at the cassette player. Emily continued speaking, louder now. What are you doing here? The man answered. I could ask you the same thing. The tape crackled again. Ellison leaned closer. Emily's voice sharpened. I've been looking through the property records. The man didn't respond immediately. Then he said something chilling. You shouldn't have done that. Emily took a breath. I know what you did. Those same words Caleb Mercer had remembered hearing 25 years earlier. The tape confirmed it. Emily wasn't guessing. She was confronting him.
Directly.
The man's voice grew colder. You don't know anything. Yes, I do, Emily said firmly. I know about the houses. I know about the companies you used to buy them. A long pause followed. The floor creaked again somewhere in the house. Emily spoke once more. I found something else too.
What?
Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. There's a burial site here. Ellison felt the entire investigation shift again. The tape had just confirmed what investigators suspected. Emily Carter had discovered Margaret Hale's grave. The man spoke again, slower now. You're making a mistake. No, Emily said quietly. You are. Another pause. Then the sound of footsteps moving closer to the recorder. Ellison held his breath. The man spoke again, his voice now only inches from the microphone. You should leave. Emily didn't move. I'm going to the police. The words echoed like a gunshot inside the small evidence room. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the recording captured a sudden struggle. Emily gasped. A sharp thud. The recorder fell sideways. Wind roared across the microphone. The sounds became chaotic. Footsteps. Furniture scraping. Emily shouting something that couldn't quite be understood. Then the man's voice again. Angrier now. You shouldn't have come here. Another loud crash echoed through the recording. Then silence. Heavy breathing. Not Emily's. The man's. The microphone picked up the slow rhythm of someone standing very close to the recorder. Listening. Thinking. Then the man spoke one final sentence. Quiet. Cold. This didn't have to happen. The tape ended with a sharp click. The room remained completely silent. Detective Ellison felt the weight of the recording settle across the entire case. For 25 years, Emily Carter's disappearance had been a mystery, but the tape revealed the truth investigators had never possessed. She had confronted Daniel Hargrove inside that abandoned house. She had accused him of hiding a body, and something violent had happened next. But the tape left one terrifying question unanswered. What happened after the struggle? Because when police discovered Emily's car days later, there had been no blood inside. No signs of violence. No body. Which meant Hargrove had done something after the recording stopped. Something careful. Something deliberate. Ellison removed the cassette from the player slowly. The evidence was powerful. But in court, after 25 years, it would not be enough by itself. They needed physical proof tying Hargrove to Emily's death. And the one place that proof might exist had already been searched: the abandoned house. But as Ellison listened to the tape again later that night, he noticed a detail buried beneath the noise of the struggle. A sound that had been overlooked. A mechanical sound.
Faint,
but unmistakable. The rumble of a truck engine starting outside the house. And suddenly Ellison realized something the original investigators had never considered. Emily Carter might not have died inside that building. She might have been taken somewhere else. And if that truck had driven away that night carrying her, then somewhere out in the rural darkness beyond that abandoned property there might still be a place where the truth had been buried for 25 years. A place only one man knew how to find. The tape changed the investigation overnight. For 25 years, detectives had chased theories, possibilities, rumors whispered around a quiet Ohio town that never quite produced proof. But now, for the first time, investigators had something solid. Emily Carter's own voice. Her confrontation with Daniel Hargrove. And the violent struggle that followed. Detective Mark Ellison played the cassette again late that night, sitting alone in his office while the sheriff's department slowly emptied around him. The building grew quiet, the fluorescent lights humming faintly overhead. The tape hissed as it spun. He focused on the final seconds again. The crash. Emily's cry. The man's breathing. And then the sound. A truck engine starting. Ellison rewound it 3 times to be sure. Each time the low mechanical rumble appeared in the same place, just after the struggle, just before the tape ended. Which meant the vehicle had been running while the recorder was still on the floor inside the house. Someone had driven away. And that detail raised a troubling possibility. If Hargrove had killed Emily inside that building, why move her? Why risk transporting a body somewhere else? Unless the house wasn't where he normally disposed of victims. Unless Emily had interrupted something before he could finish. Ellison drove out to the abandoned property again the next morning. The house looked even more fragile under the gray winter sky. Forensic teams had already removed sections of flooring and excavated the ground where Margaret Hale's remains had been discovered. Yellow evidence markers still dotted the dusty interior. Ellison stood in the back room again, studying the exposed soil beneath the floor. Margaret's burial site had been deep, carefully concealed. But if Emily had died there in 1995, her remains should have been somewhere nearby. Yet the excavation had revealed nothing else, which meant Hargrove had likely removed her body. Ellison stepped outside, letting his eyes drift across the surrounding land. The property sat alone on several acres of scrub field bordered by thin lines of forest. A dirt road stretched away from the house toward the old gravel quarry a mile to the east. Ellison remembered the aerial photographs he had studied earlier. That road connected directly to the quarry. And the quarry itself had been abandoned for nearly a decade before Emily disappeared. A perfect place to hide something. Or someone. He requested updated satellite images of the quarry area from county planning records. Within hours, the maps were spread across a conference table back at the sheriff's office. Ellison traced the dirt road with his finger. It led directly from the abandoned house to a large open pit carved into the earth decades earlier. The site had once supplied gravel for highway construction before the business collapsed in the late 1980s. Since then, the quarry had been left untouched. Rainwater filled parts of the pit, forming deep ponds. Other sections had collapsed over time, creating unstable slopes of loose rock and dirt. Ellison studied the images carefully. If Hargrove had needed a place to dispose of a body quickly, this was it. But searching a quarry was not easy. The area covered nearly 20 acres. And if someone had buried remains beneath loose gravel or water 25 years earlier, finding them now would be extremely difficult. Still, Ellison had the tape. He had the witness statement from Caleb Mercer. And he had the connection between Hargrove and the abandoned properties. It was enough to reopen the investigation officially. And enough to begin watching Daniel Hargrove again. The contractor still lived in the county. Still ran a small property development business. Still moved quietly through the same community where Emily Carter had vanished. Ellison and another detective began discreet surveillance the following week. Hargrove's routine was predictable. Morning coffee at a diner near the courthouse. Hours spent visiting construction sites around town. Evenings at a modest house on the outskirts of the county. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. But Ellison noticed something interesting when they reviewed Hargrove's business records. The contractor still owned land near the abandoned quarry. Not the quarry itself, but a strip of wooded property along its western edge. Purchased in 1996. 1 year after Emily Carter disappeared. The timing made Ellison uneasy. He requested a warrant to search the land. The approval came 2 days later. Early on a cold morning, a small team of investigators drove out to the property. The forest was thick and quiet. Tall oak trees blocked most of the winter sunlight, leaving the ground covered in damp leaves and tangled brush. A narrow path led through the woods toward the edge of the quarry. Ellison walked slowly along it. Something about the path felt unnatural. The dirt looked slightly compacted compared to the surrounding ground, like vehicles had traveled there repeatedly long ago. The path ended at a small clearing overlooking the quarry pit. Ellison scanned the ground. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Just dirt. Leaves. Rocks scattered randomly across the clearing. But one of the forensic technicians called out suddenly. "Detective." Ellison turned. The technician was crouched near the center of the clearing. "Take a look at this." Ellison approached slowly. The technician brushed away a thin layer of leaves with his gloved hand. Underneath, the soil looked different. Darker. Disturbed. Ground-penetrating radar might be able to tell us more, the technician said. Within an hour, the scanning equipment arrived. The machine rolled slowly across the clearing while technicians monitored the results on a small screen. At first, the readings showed nothing unusual, just layers of compacted soil and rock typical of the area. But when the scanner passed over the center of the clearing, the screen displayed a clear disturbance, a rectangular void beneath the surface, approximately 6 feet long. Ellison felt the air grow heavier around him. "Depth?" he asked. 1.5 meters. The technician replied. Roughly 5 feet. The team began digging immediately. Shovels cut through damp earth, exposing darker soil beneath. The deeper they went, the more obvious the disturbance became. This ground had been opened before. Roughly. Hurriedly. About 40 minutes into the excavation, a shovel struck something solid. The technician froze. Carefully brushing away dirt with a small hand tool, he exposed the edge of a plastic surface. A container. Large. Rectangular. The kind used for storage. Ellison's pulse pounded in his ears. The lid was sealed with duct tape that had hardened with age. Forensic gloves peeled the tape away slowly. Then the lid lifted. Inside was a layer of cloth. Old. Decayed. The technician folded it back gently. And beneath the fabric lay human bones. The skull tilted slightly to one side, half buried in soil that had seeped into the container over decades. For a moment, no one spoke. Ellison stared down into the grave. Because even before the forensic examiner arrived, he already knew what they had found. Emily Carter had been here all along, hidden in the woods beside the abandoned quarry, less than a mile from the house where she had confronted Daniel Hargrove 25 years earlier. But as the forensic team continued examining the container, another discovery sent a deeper chill through the clearing. There was something else inside the box. Not just bones. A second object lay near the skeleton's hand. A small metallic item, partially corroded by time. The technician carefully lifted it out. Ellison leaned closer. It was a key, attached to a rusted keychain. And when the dirt was brushed away, the engraving on the keychain became visible. A company logo. Daniel Hargrove Construction. The evidence investigators had searched for decades had finally surfaced from the ground. But as Ellison stared at the skeleton inside the container, a darker realization crept slowly into his mind. Because the container looked too large for just one body. And the radar scan beneath the clearing had revealed something else. Another disturbance in the soil. Just a few feet away. A second grave. Still waiting to be opened. The clearing beside the quarry fell completely silent. Even the wind seemed to stop moving through the trees. Detective Mark Ellison stood beside the open container, staring down at the skeletal remains that had been hidden beneath the earth for 25 years. Forensic technicians worked carefully around the grave, photographing every detail before continuing the excavation. The bones were fragile. Time had stripped away everything except the quiet outline of what used to be a life. Emily Carter had finally been found, but the discovery brought no sense of relief. Because the ground-penetrating radar had revealed something else buried beneath the clearing. A second anomaly in the soil. 6 feet away. Another rectangular shape. Another disturbance that looked exactly like a grave. Ellison slowly turned toward the spot marked by a small orange evidence flag. For a long moment no one spoke. Then the lead forensic technician said quietly, "We should start digging." The second excavation began cautiously. Shovels pushed through damp soil while investigators watched in tense silence. The forest felt heavier now, as if the ground itself held more secrets than anyone had expected. 30 minutes passed, then 40. At first the dirt revealed nothing but rocks and tangled roots. But then one of the technicians struck something hard beneath the surface. The team froze again. Ellison stepped closer. The technician knelt down and brushed away the soil with careful movements. Another container. Same size. Same shape. Same duct-taped lid. The tension in the clearing shifted from grim confirmation to something darker. Because one container meant murder. 2 containers suggested something far worse. The lid was removed slowly. Inside lay another skeleton. Smaller than Emily's. The bones were positioned differently, the body curled slightly on its side, as if forced into the container without much care. A moment of quiet passed through the group. Ellison's stomach tightened. 2 graves. 2 victims. Both buried on land owned by Daniel Hargrove. The forensic examiner crouched beside the container, examining the remains with careful precision. "These bones are older," she said. "How much older?" Ellison asked. Hard to say immediately. But the clothing fragments looked different from the 1990s. She lifted a small piece of decayed fabric from the container. The pattern was faded, but the style looked unmistakably vintage. Possibly from the 1970s. Ellison felt the realization forming slowly in his mind. Margaret Hale had been buried beneath the abandoned house. Emily Carter had been buried beside the quarry. And now another victim had appeared between them in time. Someone who had vanished years before Emily ever began investigating. Someone who had never even been connected to the case. The technician carefully sifted through the soil inside the container. A small object surfaced near the ribcage.
A ring.
Gold. Worn thin by age. The examiner studied it briefly. "There's an inscription." She cleaned the inside edge gently. Then she read the engraving aloud. "Forever yours, 1978. Ellison felt the investigation widening again. Another decade. Another missing person. Another story buried beneath layers of silence. Because if this victim had died sometime after 1978, then Daniel Hargrove, or someone connected to him, might have been killing for far longer than anyone realized. The county sheriff arrived at the scene shortly afterward. By the time he stepped into the clearing, 2 open graves lay exposed beneath the gray winter sky. One containing Emily Carter, the other holding an unidentified victim. The sheriff stared at the containers for several seconds before speaking. "How many more?" No one answered, because the question now felt unavoidable. If 2 bodies had been hidden on this property, there might be others. The investigation expanded rapidly. Additional radar scans were performed across the entire wooded strip along the quarry's edge. 3 more disturbances appeared on the radar. 3 more places where the soil had been open long ago. 3 more possible graves. Excavation teams worked through the afternoon, and by sunset, the clearing had transformed into a silent field of evidence markers. Another container appeared in the ground. Then another. And another. 5 graves. 5 victims. All buried within 50 yards of each other. Each placed carefully beneath the forest floor where no one would ever think to look. Ellison stood near the edge of the clearing watching the forensic team uncover the 3rd container. His mind raced through the timeline. Margaret Hale in 1971. Another victim in the late 1970s. Emily Carter in 1995. That meant whoever was responsible had been killing for decades, and somehow had managed to remain invisible the entire time. One man's name connected every location. Daniel Hargrove. But the timeline raised another question. Hargrove had only purchased the quarry property in 1996, 1 year after Emily disappeared, which meant the earlier graves must have been placed there before he owned the land. Ellison felt a new suspicion forming. What if Hargrove hadn't started this? What if he had inherited it? The thought lingered uncomfortably as the forensic examiner approached. "We're going to need DNA testing for the earlier remains," she said. "But based on the clothing and decomposition patterns, some of these victims may date back to the early 1980s. Ellison nodded slowly. "Which means someone was using this land long before Hargrove bought it." The examiner glanced toward the quarry pit. "Or someone who knew this area very well." Ellison thought about Victor Langford again, the construction foreman who had owned the abandoned house in 1971. The man connected to Margaret Hale's disappearance. The man who had died in 1989, 6 years before Emily Carter vanished. A disturbing possibility began forming. What if the killings had started with Langford? What if Daniel Hargrove had discovered something years later while renovating those abandoned houses? Something buried. Something hidden. Something that explained the strange property transfers Emily Carter had uncovered in the records office. Ellison returned to the office that evening with the weight of the discovery pressing heavily on his thoughts. 5 graves. 5 victims. And still no clear answer about how Daniel Hargrove fit into the entire chain of events. But as he reviewed the cassette recording again that night, one detail suddenly stood out that he hadn't noticed before. Emily had said something during her confrontation with Hargrove. Something investigators had overlooked in the chaos of the recording. He rewound the tape carefully. Listened again. Emily's voice echoed through the small office. "I know about the houses." Then another sentence followed. A quieter one, almost lost beneath the sound of the wind. Ellison leaned closer to the speaker. Emily had said, "I know what you found." Ellison froze. The words changed the entire meaning of the confrontation. Emily hadn't accused Hargrove of committing the original crime. She had accused him of discovering it, which meant Daniel Hargrove might not have been the man who buried Margaret Hale decades earlier. But he had known about the grave, and instead of reporting it, he had kept the secret. A secret buried beneath abandoned houses and remote land for years. Until Emily Carter discovered it. Until she confronted him. Until the moment everything spiraled into violence inside that empty house. Ellison realized something else then. If Hargrove had discovered the original grave years earlier, he might have known exactly where the rest were. And if that was true, then the clearing beside the quarry might only be the beginning. Because someone who hides one secret grave often hides many more. And somewhere out there, beyond the quiet woods and abandoned buildings of that Ohio county, the full truth of what had been happening for decades was still waiting to be uncovered. But before Ellison could follow that lead, the investigation would take a sudden turn. Because the next morning, as officers prepared to bring Daniel Hargrove in for questioning, they discovered something alarming. The contractor's house was empty.
His truck was gone.
And Daniel Hargrove had vanished. By the time detectives arrived at Daniel Hargrove's house, the sun had barely risen above the gray Ohio horizon. The air was bitterly cold, the kind that made breath hang like smoke in front of your face. Frost coated the grass around the property, and the long gravel driveway looked untouched except for one detail that immediately caught Detective Mark Ellison's attention. Fresh tire tracks.
Wide. Deep.
Recent. Hargrove's truck had left sometime during the night. The front door of the house was unlocked. Inside, the silence felt unnatural. The place didn't look abandoned. It looked interrupted. Coffee still sat in a mug on the kitchen counter, half full, cold now. A chair was pushed back from the table as if someone had stood up quickly. Papers were scattered across the surface. Property documents, construction permits, handwritten notes. Ellison stepped deeper into the house. A faint smell of motor oil and sawdust lingered in the air, the scent of a man who spent most of his life around tools and machinery. But something about the atmosphere felt tense, like the house itself knew the person who lived there had left in a hurry. Detectives searched every room. The bedroom closet still held clothes. The bathroom sink still held a toothbrush and razor. But one thing was missing. The gun safe in the corner of Hargrove's bedroom stood open. Empty. Ellison stared at it for several seconds. Hargrove knew. Somehow, word about the excavation at the quarry had reached him. The graves. The bodies. The evidence. He had realized the investigation was closing in. And instead of waiting for the police to knock on his door, he had run. But the question now was where? Ellison returned to the kitchen and began sorting through the papers scattered across the table. Most were ordinary construction documents, property surveys, equipment invoices, zoning approvals. But one sheet stood out. A map, printed from an old county planning database. The map showed a cluster of rural properties north of town. Ellison studied the markings carefully. Several locations had been circled with a red pen. Abandoned structures. Barns. Old farmhouses. Places far enough from town that no one would visit them regularly. The same pattern Emily Carter had discovered in the county records decades earlier. Except this time the pattern looked larger. Much larger. Ellison felt the scale of the investigation expanding again. The quarry clearing had revealed 5 graves. But if Hargrove had been involved in other properties like this, there might be more burial sites scattered across the county. And now the only man who knew where they might be had disappeared. A statewide alert went out within hours. Police began searching roads leading away from the county. Air patrol units scanned highways. Nearby gas stations were contacted for surveillance footage. By mid-afternoon, one lead finally appeared. A highway camera 20 miles south had captured a pickup truck matching Hargrove's vehicle traveling toward the state line at 3:12 a.m. The timestamp suggested he had left town shortly after midnight. Ellison watched the grainy footage carefully. The truck moved steadily through the frame before disappearing into the darkness beyond the camera. No hesitation. No sudden turns. Just a man driving away from everything he had spent decades building. But another detail in the footage caught Ellison's attention. The truck bed was covered with a tarp. Something bulky sat underneath. Too large to be tools. Too irregular to be construction materials. Ellison felt a cold possibility creeping into his thoughts. Hargrove might not just be running. He might be trying to move something. Or someone. The investigation shifted again. State troopers began searching rural roads along Hargrove's possible route. Helicopters combed wooded areas near the highway. Officers visited remote properties connected to Hargrove's business records. Hours passed with no sign of him. Then, just before sunset, another call came in. A farmer outside a small town 40 miles south reported seeing an unfamiliar truck parked near an abandoned grain silo. The description matched Hargrove's vehicle. Ellison and several deputies drove there immediately. The sky had turned a deep gray by the time they reached the property. The grain silo towered above the surrounding farmland like a rusted monument to another era. And there it was. Hargrove's truck, parked beside the structure. Engine cold. No movement inside. Ellison approached slowly, his hand resting near his holster. The tarp in the truck bed shifted slightly in the wind. He pulled it back. Underneath sat several large plastic containers. The same type investigators had uncovered in the quarry clearing. For a moment the world felt very quiet. Then one of the deputies called out from near the silo entrance. "Detective, you should see this." Ellison stepped inside the structure. The air smelled of rust and old grain dust. The concrete floor had been disturbed recently. Fresh dirt spread across one corner of the building. And beside the dirt lay a shovel, the metal blade still wet with soil. Ellison's chest tightened. Hargrove had been digging, but what he had been digging for, or burying, remained unclear. The team searched the surrounding farmland for over an hour. They found footprints leading away from the silo into a nearby tree line. Then the trail disappeared among the brush. Night began to fall. Darkness swallowed the open fields. Searchlights swept across the trees while officers moved cautiously through the woods. But Daniel Hargrove was gone. The man who had been connected to decades of hidden graves had vanished into the countryside. And now he was armed. Ellison stood outside the silo, watching the search teams spread across the farmland. Somewhere out there, Hargrove was still moving, still thinking, still trying to stay one step ahead of the investigation that had finally uncovered his secrets. But Ellison knew something Hargrove didn't. The excavation at the quarry had changed everything. Those graves had revealed a pattern, a history stretching back decades. And the deeper investigators dug into that history, the more disturbing the truth became. Because while reviewing old missing person cases that evening, one of the analysts noticed something alarming. Several women had vanished across northern Ohio between 1970 and 1995. Women who had never been connected to each other. Different towns, different years, different circumstances. But when the analyst mapped their last known locations, a chilling pattern emerged. Each disappearance occurred within driving distance of properties once owned by either Victor Langford or Daniel Hargrove. Ellison stared at the map as the realization settled in. The quarry graves might only represent a fraction of the victims. The real number could be far higher. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the farmland, the one man who might know the full truth was still out there, running. But not forever. Because the next break in the case would come from a place no one expected. Not from the woods, not from the roads, but from inside Daniel Hargrove's own past. A past that investigators had only just begun to uncover. The manhunt for Daniel Hargrove stretched into its third day. Helicopters cut slow circles across rural Ohio farmland. Patrol cars rolled down gravel roads that rarely saw more than a tractor or school bus. Deputies knocked on farmhouse doors, asking the same question again and again. Have you seen this man? Most people hadn't. But something else began happening as the news spread. Old memories started surfacing. The excavation at the quarry had already shaken the community. 5 graves discovered in the woods beside land owned by a local contractor was the kind of headline that pulled long-buried stories out of people's minds. And one of those stories came from a woman living nearly 60 miles away. Her name was Elaine Whitaker. She contacted police after seeing Hargrove's photograph on the evening news. At first, her call didn't sound particularly urgent. But when detectives listened more closely, the entire investigation shifted again. Whitaker claimed she had known Daniel Hargrove long before he became a contractor. Back in the early 1980s, when he worked construction under a foreman named Victor Langford. The same Victor Langford connected to Margaret Hale's disappearance in 1971. Detective Mark Ellison drove to Whitaker's home the next morning. The house sat at the end of a quiet suburban street lined with bare winter trees. Whitaker answered the door slowly, her expression cautious but determined. She had been in her early 20s when she first met Hargrove. Now she was in her 60s. Time had softened the details of her memory, but not the uneasiness she still carried. They sat at a kitchen table while Ellison switched on a recorder. "Tell me what you remember," he said. Whitaker folded her hands together before speaking. "I worked at a diner outside Cleveland in 1982, she said. Construction crews used to stop there for lunch all the time." Ellison nodded. "And that's where you met Hargrove?" "Yes." Her voice tightened slightly. "He wasn't the boss back then, just one of the younger workers. But he always showed up with Victor Langford." Ellison leaned forward. "What was Langford like?" Whitaker didn't hesitate. Quiet. Cold. The kind of man who watched everything but didn't say much. The description matched what little investigators knew about the former construction foreman. Did anything unusual happen while they were working in the area? Ellison asked. Whitaker stared at the table for several seconds. Then she nodded slowly. One of the waitresses disappeared. Ellison felt a sudden jolt of recognition. What was her name? Whitaker closed her eyes briefly, searching through the past. Donna Pierce. Ellison wrote it down quickly. Do you remember when this happened? Late summer. Maybe August. The name triggered a memory in Ellison's mind. He had seen it before while reviewing old missing person reports. Donna Pierce. Reported missing in 1982. The case had never been solved. Whitaker continued speaking quietly. She finished her shift one night and walked out to the parking lot. Someone saw her talking to a man in a pickup truck. Ellison's pulse quickened. What kind of truck? A work truck. Construction decals on the side. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Did anyone identify the driver? Whitaker shook her head.
No.
But a few of us thought we recognized the vehicle. Whose was it? Whitaker looked directly at him. Victor Langford's. Ellison felt the weight of the timeline pressing down harder. Margaret Hale vanished in 1971. Donna Pierce disappeared in 1982. Emily Carter vanished in 1995. 3 women. 3 decades. And every thread seemed to lead back to the same 2 men. Victor Langford and Daniel Hargrove. Whitaker continued quietly. After Donna disappeared, the construction crew stopped coming to the diner. Just like that.
Yes.
They packed up the site 2 days later. Ellison frowned. What about Hargrove? Whitaker's voice dropped slightly. That's the strange part.
What?
He kept coming back. Ellison looked up. For how long? Years. Whitaker leaned back in her chair. After Langford died in 1989, Hargrove started showing up alone sometimes. Just for coffee. He'd sit in the corner booth and stare out the window. Did he ever talk about Langford? Whitaker shook her head.
No.
But once he said something strange. Ellison waited. Whitaker's expression grew uneasy. He said people think they know the past, but the past is usually buried deeper than they realize. The words lingered in the quiet kitchen. Ellison thought about the graves beside the quarry, about the containers buried beneath the trees, about the possibility that the killings had started long before Hargrove ever bought those properties. What do you think he meant by that? Ellison asked. Whitaker hesitated. I think he knew what Langford had done. The theory had been forming in Ellison's mind for days. But hearing someone else say it aloud made the implication even darker. Victor Langford might have been the original killer, the man responsible for Margaret Hale and possibly others. And Daniel Hargrove might have discovered those crimes years later while renovating the abandoned properties Langford once owned. But instead of exposing them, he had protected them. And when Emily Carter uncovered the truth in 1995, Hargrove had done the unthinkable. He had become part of the same chain of violence. Ellison left Whitaker's house with a new piece of the puzzle. Donna Pierce's disappearance would now be reopened. Her name would be compared against the remains discovered at the quarry. And if the timeline matched, investigators might finally prove that the murder stretched back more than 40 years. But as Ellison drove back toward the sheriff's department, another call came over the radio. A state trooper had spotted a pickup truck matching Hargrove's vehicle parked beside a small motel along a rural highway. The sighting had happened less than 20 minutes earlier. Ellison turned the car around immediately. The motel stood beside a two-lane road surrounded by open farmland. A flickering neon sign buzzed above the office entrance as several patrol cars quietly rolled into the parking lot. And there it was. Hargrove's truck, parked near the far end of the building. Lights off. No movement inside. Room number 12. Officers surrounded the door. Ellison stepped forward slowly, his hand resting on his holster. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again.
Still nothing.
Finally, he nodded to one of the deputies. The door burst open. Officers rushed inside. The room was empty, the bed untouched, the bathroom dark. But something else sat on the small table beside the window. A folded piece of paper. Ellison picked it up. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. 3 words. Written in hurried ink. You're too late. Ellison felt the tension in the room shift instantly. Because the note meant something simple. Daniel Hargrove knew they were coming. He had been here.
And he had left again.
But outside the motel window, the empty highway stretched into the distance. A road that eventually led to the state border. And if Hargrove managed to cross that line before the manhunt closed in, the man connected to decades of buried secrets might disappear forever. Unless investigators could stop him first. And somewhere along that dark highway, the final chapter of the Carter cold case was already beginning to unfold. The note sat on the motel table like a quiet taunt. You're too late. Detective Mark Ellison read the words again, feeling the frustration tightening in his chest. Daniel Hargrove had been standing in this exact room only minutes earlier. Close enough that the manhunt had almost closed in on him. Almost. But almost didn't solve a cold case. Ellison stepped outside the motel room and scanned the empty highway stretching into the distance. The road cut through miles of dark farmland before eventually reaching the state line. If Hargrove was already on the move again, every minute mattered. State troopers expanded the search immediately. Roadblocks appeared along major highways leading south and west. Patrol cars fanned out across smaller rural routes. Helicopters swept low across the dark countryside, their spotlights scanning empty roads and silent fields. But Daniel Hargrove seemed to move like a ghost. No traffic cameras captured his truck leaving the motel. No gas station clerks remembered seeing him. No witnesses reported a vehicle matching his description. For hours, the search produced nothing. Then, just after midnight, a trooper station near the state border called in something unusual. An abandoned truck, parked along a dirt access road that led into a stretch of wooded land owned by the state. Ellison drove there immediately. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for two vehicles to pass. Gravel crunched under the tires of the patrol cars as they rolled deeper into the trees. Then the headlights illuminated the vehicle. Daniel Hargrove's truck. Engine cold. Driver's door open. The tarp in the truck bed flapped slowly in the wind. Ellison stepped out into the freezing air. The forest around them felt completely still.
Too still.
Officers approached the truck cautiously. The interior was empty, but the keys still hung in the ignition. And the passenger seat held something new. A worn leather notebook. Ellison picked it up carefully. The pages inside were filled with handwritten notes.
Dates.
Addresses. Property descriptions. Most of them matched locations investigators had already begun connecting to the buried graves discovered near the quarry. But the entries went back much further. All the way to 1970. Ellison flipped through the notebook slowly, feeling the story of decades unfolding across the pages. At first, the handwriting looked unfamiliar. Tighter. Older. Likely belonging to Victor Langford. But midway through the notebook, the writing style changed. The letters became heavier, angrier. Hargrove's handwriting, which meant the notebook had originally belonged to Langford. And Hargrove had inherited it somehow after the foreman's death in 1989. Ellison reached the final pages. One entry stood out. Dated February 15, 1995. The night Emily Carter disappeared. The note beneath the date read only 4 words. She knows about Margaret. Ellison felt the weight of the truth settling in. Emily Carter hadn't discovered the burial site by accident. She had uncovered Langford's crimes. And Daniel Hargrove had been keeping the secret ever since. Until she confronted him. The search team spread through the woods surrounding the truck. Flashlights cut narrow beams through the darkness as officers followed footprints leading deeper into the trees. Hargrove had left the vehicle less than an hour earlier. The trail was fresh. Boot prints pressed clearly into the damp soil. Ellison followed the path with 2 deputies close behind. The woods grew thicker as they moved farther from the road. Branches scratched against jackets. Leaves crunched underfoot. The trail continued downhill toward the sound of rushing water. A river. The kind that ran fast during winter snowmelt. Ellison suddenly understood what Hargrove might be trying to do. The river eventually flowed across the state line. A desperate man could try to follow it out of Ohio unnoticed. The sound of water grew louder. The forest opened into a narrow clearing along the riverbank. And that's when one of the deputies spotted movement. A figure standing near the edge of the water.
Tall.
Broad shoulders. Holding something in his hands. Ellison raised his flashlight. The beam illuminated Daniel Hargrove's face. For a moment, neither man moved. The river roared behind him, dark and fast. Hargrove looked older than the photographs investigators had been circulating. His eyes were tired, his beard unshaven. But there was something else in his expression. Not panic. Not fear. Resignation. Ellison spoke slowly. Daniel, it's over. Hargrove didn't raise the weapon in his hand. It was a revolver. But he held it loosely at his side. You found the graves, Hargrove said quietly. Ellison nodded. Yes. Hargrove stared at the rushing water for a moment. I wondered how long it would take. Ellison stepped closer. Emily Carter figured it out first. Hargrove closed his eyes briefly. She was smarter than I expected. The cold wind moved through the trees. Ellison kept his voice steady. You killed her. Hargrove shook his head slowly. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, but it did. Silence hung in the air. Hargrove looked back toward the forest behind Ellison, where more officers were quietly moving into position. They told me never to dig up the past, Hargrove said. Ellison frowned. Who told you that? Hargrove gave a tired smile. Victor Langford. The name lingered heavily between them. Ellison took another step forward. You found the bodies in that house years later. Hargrove nodded slowly. I was renovating the place in the late 80s. Pulled up the floorboards and saw what he had hidden underneath.
Margaret Hale.
Buried beneath the house since 1971. You should have reported it, Ellison said. I should have. Hargrove's voice carried a deep regret. But I didn't. Why? Hargrove looked toward the river again. Because once you see something like that, you realize how much power secrets can have. Ellison's stomach tightened. And Emily Carter discovered your secret. Yes. Hargrove's eyes grew distant. She walked into that house with a recorder in her pocket and accused me of murder. Ellison remembered the cassette tape. Emily's voice echoing through the recording. I tried to scare her off, Hargrove continued. Told her she didn't understand what she was getting involved in. But she wasn't afraid. No, Hargrove said quietly. She was brave. The word echoed strangely in the cold air. And during the struggle she fell, Hargrove added. Ellison's voice hardened. You expect anyone to believe that? Hargrove shook his head. It doesn't matter anymore. The revolver remained loosely in his hand. Officers behind Ellison were slowly closing the circle. You buried her beside the quarry, Ellison said. Hargrove nodded once. The same place Langford used. Ellison felt the final truth settling into place. Victor Langford had started the killings decades earlier. But Daniel Hargrove had chosen to continue hiding them. And when Emily Carter uncovered the truth, he had crossed the same line. The wind picked up along the riverbank. Ellison spoke again. Daniel put the gun down. Hargrove looked at the weapon in his hand. Then he looked back at Ellison. You know what the worst part is? Ellison said nothing. Hargrove's voice grew quieter. I spent 30 years pretending those graves weren't there. The river thundered behind him. But once you know where the bodies are buried, you never stop hearing them. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Hargrove slowly lifted the revolver. But instead of pointing it at the officers, he tossed it into the river. The gun vanished instantly in the dark current. Hargrove raised his empty hands. And just like that, the man who had carried the secrets of a 40-year chain of murders finally surrendered. But the investigation was not finished. Because the full truth of the graves and the victims buried within them was still waiting to be uncovered. And the final chapter of the Carter cold case would soon reveal just how deep the past had been buried. Daniel Hargrove was taken into custody just before 2 a.m. The cold air along the riverbank seemed to carry the weight of the moment as deputies placed the handcuffs around his wrists. For 30 years, the secrets of the abandoned Langford property had remained buried beneath dirt, concrete, and silence. Now the man who had hidden them was finally in the back seat of a patrol car. Detective Mark Ellison stood beside the river for a few seconds longer after Hargrove was driven away. The water rushed past in the darkness, carrying the revolver somewhere downstream. But the weapon no longer mattered. The truth was already out. The interrogation. By sunrise, Hargrove was sitting in an interrogation room at the county sheriff's office. A camera recorded every word. Ellison placed the worn leather notebook on the metal table between them. "You kept this for 30 years, Ellison said. Hargrove looked at the notebook without touching it. "It wasn't mine originally. Victor Langford's." Hargrove nodded. Ellison opened the pages again, revealing the entries that stretched back to 1970. Dates, addresses, notes about construction work, and cryptic marks beside certain properties. "These are burial sites," Ellison said. Hargrove didn't deny it. They're where Langford hid them. "How many?" Hargrove hesitated. Then he quietly answered, "7 that I know of." Ellison felt a chill. 7 victims. Possibly more. And only 3 bodies had been recovered so far. Langford's crimes. Over the next several hours, Hargrove slowly described what he had discovered decades earlier. In 1988, he had been hired to renovate the abandoned house once owned by Victor Langford, the former construction foreman who had died suddenly the year before. During the renovation, Hargrove removed several warped floorboards in the basement. And underneath them, he found human remains. A skeleton wrapped in rotting fabric. Later identified as Margaret Hale, the woman who disappeared in 1971. Hargrove panicked. Instead of reporting the discovery, he covered the remains again and continued the renovation. But curiosity got the better of him. While cleaning out Langford's old belongings, Hargrove found the leather notebook. Inside were the names and locations of properties Langford had worked on during the 1970s. And besides several entries, small symbols. Symbols that now matched the graves discovered near the quarry. Langford had been a killer. And Hargrove had uncovered his secret. The fatal decision. Ellison leaned forward across the table. "You should have gone to the police." Hargrove stared at the tabletop. "I thought about it, but you didn't." "No." "Why?" Hargrove exhaled slowly. "At first I was scared. But fear wasn't the real reason. The real reason came later. Once Hargrove realized the crimes would never be discovered if he stayed silent. If nobody knew about Langford, nobody would ever question me," Hargrove said. Ellison's jaw tightened. "So, you kept the secret?" Hargrove nodded. "For years. Until the night everything changed." Emily Carter's discovery. In February 1995, Emily Carter began researching old construction permits connected to abandoned properties in the county. Her research eventually led her to the Langford house. And to Daniel Hargrove. "She came to ask questions," Hargrove said quietly. Emily believed Langford had been responsible for several disappearances. But she also suspected someone else had been covering up the evidence. That someone was Hargrove. "She brought a recorder," he admitted. "She wanted a confession." Ellison slid the cassette tape across the table. "The one we found." Hargrove didn't touch it. "That argument lasted maybe 5 minutes," he said. Emily accused him of hiding Langford's crimes. She threatened to take her evidence to the police. And then the confrontation turned violent. "She tried to leave," Hargrove said. "I grabbed her arm." Emily struggled. In the chaos, she fell against the concrete wall of the basement. Her head struck the corner of a support beam. Silence followed. "She stopped moving," Hargrove said. Ellison stared at him. "You didn't call for help?" "No." Instead, Hargrove carried Emily's body to the quarry site Langford had once used and buried her beside the others. The excavation expands. Within days of Hargrove's confession, investigators returned to the quarry. Ground-penetrating radar scanned the entire hillside. More burial sites were identified. Excavation teams worked carefully through frozen soil and rock. And over the next several weeks, additional remains were recovered. By the end of the investigation, authorities confirmed 7 victims connected to the Langford burial sites. Some dated back more than 20 years. Families who had spent decades wondering what happened to their loved ones finally received answers. The legacy of the case. Detective Ellison stood beside the quarry one afternoon as forensic teams completed their final excavation. The wind moved quietly across the empty pit. For decades, the site had been just another forgotten piece of land. Now it was the center of one of the largest cold case breakthroughs in Ohio history. All because a cassette tape had been misplaced in an evidence box for 30 years. Ellison thought about Emily Carter, a young journalist who had gotten closer to the truth than anyone else. Closer than the police. Closer than anyone. And she paid for it with her life. But in the end, the evidence she left behind had done exactly what she intended. It exposed the truth. And it ensured the graves would never remain hidden again. The final chapter. Daniel Hargrove would eventually stand trial for the murder of Emily Carter and for concealing multiple homicide victims. But the story of the Langford murders and the cold case that finally exposed them was far from forgotten. Because sometimes the smallest piece of evidence, a forgotten tape, a buried notebook, a decades-old secret, can change everything. The trial began nearly a year after the arrest of Daniel Hargrove. By then, the story had spread far beyond the small Ohio county where the investigation began. National media outlets were covering what had become one of the most disturbing cold case breakthroughs in decades. 7 graves, 1 forgotten notebook, and a cassette tape that had sat unnoticed in an evidence box for 30 years. At the center of it all was the murder of Emily Carter. The courtroom. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Family members of the victims sat quietly in the front rows, many holding photographs of loved ones who had disappeared decades earlier. Some of them had spent more than 20 years without answers. Now they were finally hearing the truth. Prosecutors laid out a simple but devastating case. The crimes had begun with Victor Langford, a construction foreman who had murdered several victims in the 1970s and buried them near the quarry. But Langford died in 1989. And when Daniel Hargrove discovered the remains years later, he made a choice. Instead of revealing the truth, he protected the secret for decades, until Emily Carter uncovered it. The cassette tape. The most powerful moment of the trial came when prosecutors played the cassette recording Emily had secretly made the night she confronted Hargrove. The courtroom fell completely silent. Emily's voice filled the room.
Calm.
Determined. You know what's buried there. Then Hargrove's voice answered.
Low.
Defensive. The argument escalated quickly. Emily accusing him of hiding Langford's murders. Hargrove denying everything. The recording captured the tension rising between them. Then the sounds of movement. A struggle. A loud crash. And silence. The tape ended there. Several jurors looked visibly shaken. The evidence was impossible to ignore. The defense. Hargrove's attorneys argued that Emily's death had been accidental. They claimed the confrontation turned physical, and she fell during the struggle. Hargrove himself testified briefly. His voice was flat, almost emotionless. I never meant for her to die. But prosecutors focused on what he did afterward. He didn't call an ambulance. He didn't report the accident. Instead, he buried her body at the same quarry where Langford had buried his victims decades earlier. That decision told the jury everything they needed to know. The verdict. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with its decision. Daniel Hargrove was found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Emily Carter. He was also convicted on multiple counts of concealing homicide victims connected to the burial sites. When the verdict was read, several families in the courtroom quietly wept. For the first time in decades, the long mystery surrounding the quarry had finally been resolved.
Sentencing.
The judge sentenced Hargrove to 40 years in prison. Given his age, it was effectively a life sentence. Before the hearing ended, the judge addressed the courtroom. Secrets like this do not disappear, he said. They wait, sometimes for decades. But eventually the truth finds its way to the surface. Hargrove said nothing as deputies led him away. Emily Carter's legacy. Months later, a small memorial was placed near the quarry site. It honored all 7 victims who had been discovered during the investigation. But one name stood out: Emily Carter, the young journalist who had uncovered the truth long before anyone else. Her reporting had never been published. Her story had never made the news. Yet her determination had ultimately exposed a chain of crimes hidden for more than 40 years. Detective Ellison's final visit. Years after the trial, Detective Mark Ellison returned to the quarry one last time. The excavation site had been reclaimed by grass and trees. Nothing about the place looked unusual anymore. But Ellison knew what had once been buried there. 7 lives. 7 families waiting for answers. And 1 reporter who refused to let the truth stay hidden. He stood quietly for a moment before turning back toward his car. The Carter cold case was finally closed. But the lesson of the investigation remained clear. Sometimes the smallest piece of forgotten evidence, a misplaced tape, a hidden notebook, a buried secret, can reopen a story the world thought was lost forever. Even after the trial ended, the story of the Carter case refused to fade away. The investigation had officially closed, but its impact continued spreading through the small Ohio communities connected to the victims. Families who had spent decades living with uncertainty were finally able to hold proper funerals. Gravestones were placed where there had once only been questions. For some, the closure came with relief. For others, it came with anger, because the truth revealed something painful. The victims might have been found years earlier if the secret had not been hidden. The victims finally identified. Forensic teams worked for nearly 2 years after the trial to identify the remains discovered at the quarry. Advances in forensic anthropology and dental record comparisons helped investigators confirm several identities. Among them were victims who had disappeared during the early 1970s while traveling through the region. Some had been reported missing in neighboring states. Others had cases that had gone cold decades earlier. The burial sites tied many of those disappearances back to one man, Victor Langford, the construction foreman who had used job sites and rural properties to hide his crimes. Langford had died long before the truth surfaced, but the notebook he left behind had quietly recorded every location. The quiet hero of the case. In the years that followed, local journalists often revisited the story of Emily Carter. When she first started investigating the abandoned Langford property in 1995, she had little more than rumors and old building permits. But she kept digging. She followed paperwork, interviewed former construction workers, and eventually connected the same name to multiple unsolved disappearances. Her final mistake was confronting Daniel Hargrove alone. But the cassette recording she carried that night ultimately became the piece of evidence that solved the entire case. Without it, the graves might have remained hidden forever. Changes in the evidence system. The discovery of the forgotten tape also forced the county sheriff's department to examine how cold case evidence was handled. Detectives realized the cassette had been logged correctly in 1995, but it had been filed in the wrong evidence box during a storage reorganization years later. The mistake meant investigators reviewing the case never saw it. After the trial, the department implemented a digital tracking system for all cold case evidence. Every item was scanned and cataloged electronically to prevent another oversight like the one that delayed the Carter investigation for 30 years. Detective Mark Ellison helped oversee the changes before retiring several years later. The abandoned quarry. Today, the quarry looks almost peaceful. Trees have grown back across the hillside. Wild grass covers the ground where excavation teams once worked. If someone passed by without knowing the history, the land would seem completely ordinary. But for the families who visit the memorial nearby, the place means something else. It is where the truth finally surfaced, and where the silence that lasted for decades finally ended. The final lesson. The Carter case is often studied in criminal investigation courses today, not because of how complicated it was, but because of how close investigators came to solving it years earlier. All the evidence had been there. The burial sites, the notebook, the recording. But one misplaced item delayed the truth for 30 years. And yet, even after all that time, the truth still surfaced. Because secrets buried in the ground rarely stay hidden forever.